So I'm going to talk a little bit about my journey, in particular my academic journey. As Maria told us, really switched interests quite a bit. I applied to Yale, a little bit of foreshadowing, as an English and a history major before I decided to do economics, computer science. And then again, at the end of school, I thought I was going to work in finance and had a change of heart sort of at the last minute to sort of do an econ PhD instead. So things are often less set than they seem, but it's often useful to talk about how I came to these decisions and how people do switch. I'm going to start with my high school years. I grew up in Deerfield, Illinois. I did many things kind of well, I would say, but oftentimes, at least my parents used to tell me that you needed something like very special about yourself. You know, they used to say like, make yourself pointy. I didn't really know what that meant, and I'm not sure I did a great job at that. But I tried to be very self-reflective about the things I did and in particular why I did them. So I'm going to focus a little bit on my relationships with my high school teachers and sort of the soul searching process of writing my essay, which I worked very hard on. Next, I'll talk about my college experience at Yale. I can talk a little bit about, what makes Yale different from MIT, the sort of extracurriculars I got involved with, and the internships I did. Then I'll talk about sort of deciding not to do finance, my work at MIT, and then eventually the MIT PhD program. During this time, if you have any questions, I'd love to take them afterwards, or feel free to interrupt. As a quick timeline, ignore the 2013, 2017. I am graduated from high school in 2015 in Deerfield, Illinois. I went to Yale, where I was a double major in mathematical economics, computer science. I had very good grades. I worked for 2 years afterwards as a predoctoral fellow at MIT. That's basically a research assistant. And this will come up again when I talk about sort of undergraduate experiences. And then I just finished my first year of the economics PhD program at MIT, where I'm studying on a NSF scholarship, a government grant that sort of covers the first few years so that you don't even have to teach or research to get funding. All right, high school. Truly, I was looking for high school pictures of me. That is one of the best ones I could find. Deerfield is a northern suburb of Illinois. I thought it might be interesting to sort of stress some of the differences. It's a very white suburb. There are very few other Asians in the town. I pulled up the census from 2010, 2020. The numbers are, at least for me, they were kind of staggering. There was maybe one other Chinese kid in my school. Um, this is by itself sort of just an interesting experience. Maybe my Chinese would have been better if it was slightly more Asian. Um, but I think it was one of the things I reflected on often in my college essays and actually in my interview. Uh, so I went to a public high school in Illinois. It was a well-funded high school and high performing, but it was still a public school. And in general, it was very non-competitive. This is good for some kids and bad for others. For me, I think it was great because I had a lot of access to teachers. In particular, not everyone wanted to talk to teachers. You know, and even if you show like a little bit of interest and you ask them about things, perhaps just outside of grades, you read something, you like it, you ask a teacher for, more books like it, you're having trouble with some sets of math problems, or you want to know what applications these math techniques have. I think asking teachers these things helped me form really close relationships with them, especially because in general, other kids in my school just wouldn't really talk to them or really ask them anything. And in the Midwest, I was on the AP curriculum, and the Midwest generally skews towards the ACT. In general, I don't think schools differentiate too much between the ACT and SAT. I took both. I found the ACT much easier. It could just be a, idiosyncratic. It could just be me, but in general, I would say probably take both. You might find one much easier than the other. At Deerfield High School, I took 11 AP tests. I did well in all of them. I was a valedictorian. In particular, I think something in common with some of the students who have spoken in the past is that my high school didn't offer all the courses, but I wanted to take some of them. So we found a way. I enrolled in an online AP chemistry course for credit with my school, and I did a independent study. I asked if I could just meet with a teacher once a week. I would learn linear algebra on my own, and the school approved it. So sometimes it's just finding these opportunities and asking. Otherwise, I played music. I was in my high school orchestra. I started cello in third grade. Throughout my whole life, I played basketball and tennis. So I was on the varsity basketball and tennis teams. And then I did have volunteering components. I started a 2-1-2 basketball tournament, actually, which this was honestly part of my own wish to play more 2-1-2 basketball, which helped raise money for charity. It earned over $10,000, and I was a school tutor. In general, I think, as I alluded to at the beginning, I knew good grades wouldn't necessarily distinguish myself. So the biggest value of the application essays for me was sort of showing self-awareness. I think that if you don't know why you're doing an activity, then the sort of missions committees, how could they know? So I wanted to sort of reflect deeply on what I did, what I liked about them, and in particular, what do I value about myself? I think it's important to know that before you apply because you're asking schools to see something that they value about you. Despite having taken many STEM courses, I loved my English classes in high school, and I decided I wanted to apply as an English major. This was a bit risky. I didn't have, some English majors enter writing contests, they have big writing samples. I didn't really have any of this. But my essay, I think, really helped a lot with this. It wasn't just a re-articulation, I think, of the achievements. There's a lot of sections in schools' application forms where you can just list out all the clubs you're in, all the things you've done, all the awards you've won. Mine was not that long, promise. But I knew I wanted to say something else besides, and by the way, did I mention that I did this charity basketball tournament? I wrote instead a short story style essay. I made a lot of allusions and used stylistic references to my other favorite short stories. And the short story content was actually just about buying flowers and asking someone on a date. By sort of writing this, I thought I could show rather than tell about what I valued about myself, right? How I wanted to use writing to think about the world more deeply. Because I said I'd talk a little bit more about the essays and the recommendation letters and the interview components. I really had two essays. One was the one I just talked about. It reflected on English and how stories can give us sort of the courage to live more bravely. I talked about how I was scared to ask someone out, but by reading, I think I was able to self-reflect and find a way of living life that I wanted to aspire to and do. Uh, for me, that was about showing that academic writing wasn't just an academic discipline, but sort of how to think about life. The other essay was about history. In particular, my parents took me to China a lot growing up. And I remember visiting a Jewish refugee museum in Shanghai. And I wrote about sort of the unlikely parallels between this Jewish community in China and then me as a Chinese, American-born Chinese kid in a predominantly Jewish town. I spent a lot of time rewriting these essays because they were, by the time you hit senior year, I really felt like they were the one part of the application process that I had the most control over. Everything else, I think, was a product of many sort of forces. Some of the things my parents wanted me to do, some of the things I had just started when I was a kid, but this felt very much in my hands. So I spent a lot of time working on the essays. The other part of the application was probably the letters of recommendation and the interviews. As I mentioned, I was close with a lot of teachers, and I think this helped. Um, Part of what helped was asking them for general advice. Uh, First, people in general like to talk about themselves and reflect on their lives. But I was just interested. I liked them. I found the teachers I really liked. and sort of ask them, how did you figure out what you wanted to do in life? Did you have any advice? Not all teachers obviously will have the time, but just, asking any sort of question outside of class, I think is something that is often really appreciated. One thing that I've found is that I've always been a little bit afraid to bother people. And as in high school, in college, and in graduate school, it's always, I think, better to reach out and try. People are much more receptive than you fear. I always thought I would annoy them or take up too much of their time, but I think they really enjoyed it, and it led to a lot of really good relationships. And then on the interview part, I had a lot. I think I didn't apply to too many schools after getting into Yale early, but the Yale interview was by far the best. And I think what was really important for it was the role of reflection. I interviewed with someone who was, I think, a history professor at U Chicago, and he sat down, and his first question right away was, "What role does chance have in your life and in bringing you to this moment in this place?" And it was, I think, right along the lines of what I had been thinking about. And so we talked for 2.5 hours at museum, and I'm fairly confident that that was some small or large part of why I got in early. So what happened at Yale? Yale was a lot of fun. So you can see one of the clubs I was involved in above, the Consent and Communication Education Program, where we gave talks to first years and second years about consent and sort of creating a safer environment on campus. The bottom photo is a graduation photo with me and one of my best friends. So I applied as an English and a history major, and I thought I would do these. The other two classes, though, I was, on advice actually from my sister and my mother, were economics, computer science. I took all 4 sets of classes throughout the first year, but I found writing to be very hard. It still is very hard, I think, for everyone, but I wasn't sure it was what I wanted to do with my life. And I really enjoyed the economics, computer science classes. So, most schools, I think, will allow you to change majors. I think it's a mistake sometimes to think that you're too locked in, that you come to college and you have an idea of a major, and that is what you have to do. And one of the benefits of liberal arts colleges in particular is that they're built to allow you to switch. Yale in particular, the major requirements for courses and majors are somewhat low. So there's a lot of switching, and that was really good for me. And again, it was relationships, I think, that really led me down the paths I took. I had an economics professor who taught the intro classes. I think some kids started the really advanced classes. I really started at the, intro Econ 110. And I got to know the professor. I really liked him. He said, you should consider using this summer to explore economics research. And I ended up coming back to it and really loving it. I think the major advice was that you're rarely as locked in as you think. And, it's often easier, even if it's in a little bit more compressed of a time span, to explore a little bit and then find something that you really like than to just pick one thing and push your way through. In particular, at least at Yale, which was a liberal arts school, there are so many paths to the same job. There's these prestigious, consulting, finance, research positions that often went to people from a ton of different backgrounds, a ton of different experience levels, and a ton of different majors. So I think it would be a mistake to think that there's only one path to get where you want to go. At Yale, there's a list of activities. Some of these are quite interesting, actually, but they're a little bit school specific. I would say that one of the benefits of Yale was that it had a lot of emphasis on exploration and sort of the extracurriculars. I don't think most schools have this sort of emphasis. So I was able to do, 5 things, probably more than this, And one of the things I really valued actually was because I grew up in such a white area without very many other Asians, I wanted to meet Asian Americans, and Yale has an Asian American Cultural Center, which was lovely. I worked there my first year and my second, and my third year I was the co-president. Uh, I was a consent communication educator, which uh, gave talks to first and second years about creating sort of a safer climate on campus. I traveled to Israel with students from West Point to sort of learn about the Israel-Palestine conflict, and that was a really cool and sort of eye-opening experience. I loved basketball still. I'm not I'm not tall enough to play on the men's basketball team, but it's like the perfect height for the women's basketball team. So I practiced with them. I occasionally helped manage. I was on a social club. In general, I think the biggest thing was getting involved with a lot of different things. There's a tons of interesting people out there. And I think talking to them and hearing them reflect on their sort of lives and journeys really helped me get a sense of what else was out there and how big the world is. Uh, in particular, you can get advice from them. You can hear about new opportunities from them. They'll help you mock interview. And so one of the biggest parts, I think, of being an undergraduate is sort of exploring what you want to do afterwards. And there's a lot of opportunities to explore. Not all of them are open to first years. So after you finish your first year, there's some internship opportunities. They're hard to find and they're rare. A lot of it is just, they'll open up as you get older. People want you to be a little bit older, take more classes, have a little bit more exposure to the world. One of the easiest places to find things to do after your first year, I think, is in research programs. Labs often need more people. Um, Econ was willing to take me on, even though I had only really taken some intro classes and some, more advanced math classes. And that was, I think, invaluable. And in particular, I don't think it locks you in at all. And you can see I did econ research actually my first summer, and then I worked in sort of tech as a product management intern. And then I worked in finance afterwards at a trading internship. And these, I think, really benefited from me talking about the sort of econ research internship. And I'll talk a little bit more about sort of narratives. But just as a broad overview, the first summer, did I accomplish much research? No. But older professor was willing to take me and teach me sort of a lot of the tools. And in particular, I learned to think critically about knowledge, how it's produced, and to sort of question things that you're taught. A lot of the things that are taught in textbooks are presented as facts, but you should be thinking kind of critically about, how did they get here? Do I believe it? The second summer, I was also CS, and so I wanted to see what working in tech was like. I also wanted to travel. So I went to a startup in Singapore, which was perfect because I really wanted the chance to sort of pick what I was going to work on. And startups were a good place to do that because it's really all hands on deck. You get to work on a little bit of everything. So I created slides, I presented, I analyzed data. Most of it was interfacing between the business and the tech teams for the actual product. The third year summer, I wanted to see what finance was like because so many people were doing it. It seemed like a lot of smart people were in it, although not all of them liked it. So I went to a trading internship at D. Shaw in New York. I worked with the team. It's typical finance things. If you if you guys are interested, I can talk a little bit more about that after. But perfect. Reflections on college. It's a perfect time to try new experiences. Basically, there's a few things. I would say that you should know early on what you're doing and how to get there. That would include med school, which there's been a previous presentation on, and maybe pre-law, although I've seen a lot of pivots. But for everyone else, I think that it's really important to sort of explore. As I said before, it's often way more beneficial to figure out what you like and then do that carefully than to sort of just pick something and lock in. Research labs are great for first years. And finally, I think this is the most important thing, both for high school and college. It's important to take the time to sort of reflect on experiences, both to grow as a person. I think often things don't have much meaning to you unless you sit down and think about, why did I do this? what did I learn? But it's also incredibly helpful for applications and interviews. Each one of my interviews really asked me about, what the things on your resume. They say, hey, I see that you worked in econ research. What did you learn? Can you explain it to me, what you were working on? I see that you worked as a project manager. What were some of the challenges? And it was really important for me to sort of sit down both during and after these processes and sort of think about, what did I learn? What was I doing? Why did I do it? And how does this lead me to where I ended up? And that was also an important part of how I was able to pivot so many times between research to computers, to sort of tech, to finance, back to research. After graduation, the last pivot, I think, is that these pictures are on top, it's my PhD cohort. This is a murder mystery dinner party. I'm in the right, in the crazy shirt. And then on bottom is me with some of my college friends traveling across Asia. My last pivot, I think, was I received a job offer with Citadel in the fall of 2018, which would be my senior year fall. But, as I said before, you're often less locked in than you actually think. I decided in spring 19 that I actually wanted to be in Boston, and I was able to find a research position at MIT. I was really scared. I was like, oh man, they're gonna be really mad at me, or I signed. Maybe this means I'll never be able to work in finance again. Is this something I'm willing to live with? It was a lot of money, but everything I ended up working out. I've really done a lot of pivoting. And again, a lot of this is possible when you really think about, like, what about your previous experiences leads you to your next. Um, I think one natural comparison is finance and econ academia. The pace of life is very different. Sort of the rigorousness with which you answer questions is different, but also the turnover is very different. I've talked about these things many times in interviews on both sides. And finally, I would say that reflecting on all these things is much easier when you have good mentors and good friends. Finally, I was an MIT research assistant for 2 years. I worked with Amy Finkelstein. I was able to submit a paper for conferences with her and two professors at Stanford that I'm still actively working with. It was a really fun experience, I think. The most important thing was that it provided insight into what being a full-time academic would be like. I was able to sort of take classes and sort of supplement some of the math courses and explore my interests as an economist. And in general, as usual, talking to people around me really helps give me perspective on sort of what being a grad student was like, what being a professor is like, and ultimately helped me pick to become a PhD student. Is my okay, perfect. I'm almost done. I see actually raised hands. I'm not sure how to take them, but I'm almost there. The final slide is really on West economics. I decided to give you'll see actually a slide like this in Nagisa's presentation, which might have been two before. I'll give a different answer than she did. Economics is the quantitative study of allocations given scarcity, which makes it a huge field. When you can't have everything, what should we have? And in particular, I've connected it before to English in the past because there's a lot of storytelling. There's a lot of thoughtfulness underneath the models. It's quite rigorous in terms of data science and statistics. There's even pure mathematics as sort of a branch in econ, but a lot of it is about causal interpretation. We can't just observe the data. We have to understand why things are happening, and we have to sort of use this math to back up these arguments. And I gave a list of 3 things I'm actually actively working on. What role can policy play in mitigating the opioid crisis? This is a bit more severe in the United States, but a problem in many places. how do firms use data, and should we regulate the use of private data? I'm working at Microsoft right now to try and answer these questions in both sort of an academic and a corporate setting. And how do pharmaceutical companies sort of respond in prices to generic entry and the entry of competing drugs? So I've just finished my first year. It's a great time. A lot of the people that you've seen before, I've had the pleasure of meeting. They are incredible. Ruby, in particular, Maria's daughter, is a close friend, and she is lovely. Thank you so much for your time. I'm really happy to answer any questions or reflect more.